Welcome back to... So the Iranians wanted to murder the Saudi ambassador to the US, but they employed a clown to do it, and they've been found out. But look, this is no laughing matter. I mean, it really isn't. Aurel Braun is an internationally revered historian and writer and Middle East expert, and he joins me now from Montreal. Welcome to you, Professor. Now, Iran... People need to realise this. I'm sure they do, but this is not part of the Arab world. It's a separate culture, speaking a different language, Persian, Shia Islam, speaking Farsi. They were dominant for a long period in history. They would like to be dominant again in the region, just like the Turks would. And there's no love for Iran in Saudi Arabia or Egypt, but they have a big navy, and they want to go nuclear, and they sponsor terrorism. How much of a threat is Iran right now?
It's a very serious threat. It is not just historical ambitions, that is, that they want to dominate the region, but they have a genocidal regime that has global universalistic goals. Basically, they want to see a fundamental transformation of the world where they would push their rigid ideology. They are willing to invest a tremendous amount of money to pursue it. They are trying to build nuclear weapons, and they believe themselves to be above international law. I mean, what was attempted here could have resulted in horrific tragedy. It is, in international law, an act of war because it would have been committing mass murder on the territory of another state. And this is not the first time that the Iranians apparently have engaged in this. There are very serious allegations that they were behind the bombing of the Jewish center in Buenos Aires several years ago, and that it wasn't just that they were going to attack the Saudi ambassador, but they were going to bomb the embassy as well as the Israeli embassy. And this is a government whose leader appears before the United Nations to the applause of, sadly, many countries, where it calls for the utter destruction and the eradication of another state, and there are no measures taken that are effective.
They, of course, claim, and let's be quite bold here, let's be honest. The Iranian government are a bunch of psychopathic liars. They claim there are no homosexuals in Iran. They claim the Holocaust didn't happen. How do we take these people seriously? But many do, including many on the organized left in North America. But they claim this is not true. They had no intention of carrying out these assassinations and these murders. Do you believe it for a moment?
Well, we know that there's very concrete evidence of the support that they have given Hamas and Hezbollah. These are organizations that are dedicated to the eradication of an entire people. We know that they have sent agents abroad to commit a variety of crimes. The evidence comes from a great many sources. And the words, as we may wish to dismiss them as something ludicrous, that the kind of references that Ahmadinejad made at the United Nations recently when he talked about racism, that the French Revolution as well as the Russian revolutions were plots started by the Zionists. Well, let's not forget that historically we have had individuals before who also made these inflammatory, ludicrous statements, but then they went on to kill vast numbers of people. And this kind of leadership, if it has its finger on a nuclear button, would people be willing to gamble with that? This is one of the big questions. No one knows for sure exactly what they would do if they had the power to carry out their threats. But given their actions, given the repression at home, given their involvement in enormous numbers of acts of violence in their neighborhood, why would anybody wish to take a gamble and say, well, these are just, statements that are made by people who are not really serious.
Yeah. Well, yes, we know the French Revolution was in 1789. Yes, we know the Zionist movement really began, I suppose, in the 1880s, 1890s. But if you really look at the material, it's not Robespierre, it's Robespierre-Berg. It's not Danton, it's Danton-Steen. And Marat, of course, we know, was an Orthodox rabbi. So, but in all seriousness, we have Hezbollah being a southern flank, I suppose, of Iran. We have Venezuelan agents going to Iran and Iranians going to Venezuela. And this I find very worrying. Iranians going to Venezuela and then disappearing. And suddenly we see people who don't look at all Latin American with Venezuelan passports. So that there's an alliance that has occurred now in the world. This is threatening in terms of assassination and the power of Tehran. They're sending their navy further and further afield. we can't ignore them, can we?
We ignore this Iranian regime at our peril. I mean, we do not need to believe all of the allegations that have been made about involvement everywhere around the world. There is so much concrete evidence in terms of what we know that is absolutely certain, and we can also listen to their statements. I mean, the incitement to genocide is a crime in international law. This is something that is actionable. The leadership of Iran ought to be up before a tribunal and tried for these kind of incitements to genocide and for other crimes that they've committed, both externally and internally. The problem has been that the attempt at sanctions have not worked sufficiently. And the Obama administration, which has had very good intelligence that Afghanistan had been involved in Afghanistan, as well as in other parts of the world, has been very reluctant to take action. And even now, it is saying that it's going to ratchet up sanctions. Well, these are sanctions that simply have not worked. So the big question is, what is the international community prepared to do? Because the Iranian regime has been continually emboldened by the fact that even when it engaged, not just in the statements inciting genocide, but in actions which have persuaded a great many different countries that Iran is behind them, nothing effective has been done. No restraints have been put in place that have managed to constrain Iranian action. Consequently, as bad as this is something that is part of a process that could get vastly worse as Iran is getting closer to obtaining nuclear weapons.
We will continue to monitor this, and if you will, we'll have you back on the show. Professor Braun, thank you so very much indeed.
My pleasure.